Bismillah is January, January 19th, 2014. It is 5:50. I'm in Houston, Texas with Mr. Waliakbar Muhammad of the Brandon Collection. We've interviewed him previously, and he's been gracious to grant us some time to answer a few follow-up questions for the After Malcolm Research Collective and Digital Archive. Again, thank you so much for your time. I'm Tom Laporte with the archive conducting the interview for today.
My pleasure, Tom. Thank you for having me.
Assalamu alaikum again. Thank you for being
Wa alaikum salam.
First question is, there's this question of the very first temple in Atlanta, temple number 15. So could you clarify where this first temple was located?
Well, according to a good authority, Brother Harold Muhammad, who did some research on this, the first teachings in the Atlanta area, first teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad in the Atlanta area, were done by a brother named James, who was here in the fall of 1955. He taught in a hotel room in East Atlanta. And after there were several believers, they were able to rent space in the Oddfellows Hall on Auburn Avenue. And they subsequently moved to Edgewood, and I don't remember the numbers, but I think it's 222 and a half Edgewood Avenue, if we have to correct those numbers. But the half is right.
Okay. And then they moved from there to?
From there, to the best of my knowledge, it was to the Bankhead location. And from the Bankhead location to what's presently now the university, or the W.D. Muhammad. It's not the high. Was it the high school is behind it now? But the W.D. Muhammad schools.
Okay. And then in your research, you also there's one of the questions was asked was, are there newspaper clippings, and you in fact have a newspaper clipping?
Yes, there are several newspaper clippings that document the story. Harold Muhammad did a lot of research for Muhammad Speaks when he was the head of the Atlanta Bureau of Muhammad Speaks. He was quite a journalist. He was well respected throughout the community as a whole, and people from all across Georgia would come to meet him at Pascal's restaurant. He would set up office in a corner of Pascal's restaurant, and people who had concerns, who had stories, would always manage to find him there. And he had a unique element about his soul that made him sensitive to issues of the African American people. And he was, by the grace of Allah, given the gift to be able to pen those emotions into his articles. He could rivet you with his articles and his ability to write. And he was just able to find those stories just by the grace of Allah. Also with him was a brother named Curtis Sharif, who now lives in Beaumont, Texas. He did a lot of photography work with Harold, and he and Harold were like a pair. It's like, I relate them to my relationship with Gaif Nur Kashif, who was an editor with Muhammad Speaks, and then later with Bilalian News. But he was head of the Washington, D.C. Bureau when I came into the temple. And I followed him around as he gathered stories, and subsequently picked up a camera and began to illustrate some of those stories he was doing, and later got an opportunity to go to Chicago and actually work for Muhammad Speaks. So.
And I believe we have some Muhammad Speaks clip for sure about this temple 15 that you're going to let us use for the archive collection. I appreciate that. I believe there's another as well.
Absolutely.
And as you were saying, so it was Brother James X who was the first one in Atlanta.
That's correct.
Okay.
I did not know him, and oddly enough, I haven't talked to anybody. I haven't actually talked. Wait a minute. I think I did talk to Brother Sabir, who knew Brother James, but I'm not really certain. But he was here for a brief period. What happened in those days, in the 60s, is that brothers and sometimes sisters, because I recently found an article in which a sister described how she brought Islam, as taught by the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, to the state of Texas. It was one sister who heard something to do with the teaching, got in touch with the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, went back and forth from Chicago to Houston with messages or with information sufficient to start the temple here in Texas. So
What number, do you know the number?
I don't remember if it was Dallas. It might have been Dallas, because I think Dallas was before Houston.
Okay. All right. Then ultimately, when in Atlanta, the last incarnation before they bought the spot that is now the school, that was a Christian church. Is that a Baptist church? Is that correct?
That was a church on Bankhead Highway.
Okay.
And it was a bit of controversy in that the pastor of the church put the church on the market because they needed to sell the church, and he wanted to relocate. The area was becoming increasingly, as they say, dark because of African Americans moving in, and they wanted to relocate. When the congregation found out that he was interested in selling to Elijah Muhammad or the Nation of Islam, the congregation revolted and demanded that he not do it. And the pastor, in essence, still sold the church. But I believe this was the first instance in which the church was sold to a lawyer or a law firm, and that law firm, acting on behalf of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, purchased the church to give the pastor an opportunity to save face. And then the law firm just deeded the property over to the Honorable Elijah Muhammad. So this also had to be done, I believe, in Florida, where there was a similar kind of situation. What was happening was the FBI, in their efforts to diminish the influence of the Nation of Islam and other institutions that were giving rise to a sense of black dignity, black self-righteousness and decency, they would go in and they would raise concerns. They wouldn't say, don't sell, but they'd go in and raise concern. Now, if you sell to these black nationalists, you're going to be responsible if something happens. That happened to me in Washington, D.C. When I became interested in journalism. We couldn't get the firsthand information in the 60s from what was going on through the U.S. media. So what we'd do is we would listen to Radio Spain, we would listen to Radio Cuba, we would listen to different stations. We'd use the shortwave radio in an effort to better get a signal from the shortwave radio. I put an antenna on the building where I lived, on the apartment, on the top floor of the apartment building. The FBI came and told the owner of the building that if I used that antenna to interfere with aircraft landing at the Washington National Airport, that he would be held responsible for any plane crashes or anything that happened. Now only thing I put up there was a band of wire in a square shape. It's called a rhombus antenna, and it's a receiving antenna. It doesn't transmit anything. Didn't have a transmitter, and if I did, that would not be the kind of antenna you'd use on a transmitter. But because of that, then the landlord came to me and he threatened to to revoke my lease. He was going to just take away my right to live in the apartment building.
So ultimately, did you remove the antenna?
I took that antenna down and put up a long wire, which worked almost as well, and he never knew the long wire was up there. Neither did the FBI, I guess.
And along that same vein, like the FBI sort of stirring questions among community. Do you know in that property if there was any involvement from the Ku Klux Klan in terms of uprising?
I never saw any. I never saw any information that the Klan was involved with that property.
Okay.
However, Dr. Abdul Alim Shabazz, who was a professor at Clark Atlanta University, when he accepted to become Muslim under Elijah Muhammad, then there was a cross burned in his yard, and he lived in the area of Pascal's Restaurant, which is not too far from the Bankhead.
Okay. Another question that is still sort of on this same topic of placement of the temples. So the Atlanta Journal-Constitution reported that the original Auburn Avenue location was a, and I quote, little rat hole of a place, end quote, in a shared facility with the Klan. Do you know anything about that being true or otherwise?
I haven't heard in my research of the Nation of Islam sharing any facilities with the Klan.
Okay.
Their description of a rat hole is, again, part of the journalistic swipes that the media took against the Nation of Islam all the time. They were spurred to a number of these attacks by information leaked from the FBI. Louis Lomax is an excellent example of the FBI using information they gathered on the Nation of Islam to try and make the nation have a bad image. He worked with, I can't call his name on the program, The Hate That Hate Produced.
Yeah.
And oddly enough, that was one of the programs that directed my attention to the Nation of Islam and gave me greater encouragement to want to become a part.
Wow, okay.
Also, Louis Lomax's book, which was written under the same guise, was the book that I didn't know the connection between the program and the book. But Louis Lomax's book, When the Word is Given, is an excellent example. That's the book that drew me into the Nation of Islam. Once I talked to Minister Benjamin, who lived in Deanwood outside of Washington, D.C., and got a good taste of how Muslims lived and carried on their life, I became more interested. I finally got a copy of Lomax's book, and I wound up appearing on the doorstep of 1519 4th Street in Washington, D.C.
Okay. And what year was this?
That would have been 1962, I believe.
62. Okay. And I think we've covered this question about how many locations and all that of the temple. Also, there's this question that the Bankhead Highway Temple was in a Klan area, sort of writ large, and that Malcolm had come to Atlanta and negotiated with the Klan prior to Elijah's speech in the 1960s so that it would not be disrupted by Klan demonstrations. Do you have any information about that?
There was a threat by the Klan to disrupt any meeting that was planned by the Muslims here in Atlanta. And I believe it was Minister Jeremiah, it was the Supreme Captain, Raymond Sharif, and I don't know if Malcolm was present at the meeting or not, but there was a meeting by Muslim official or officials of the Nation of Islam with the Klan, and as the Muslims always did, were steadfast in their stance, and there was no disruption of the meeting. There was no obvious disruption by the Klan, but the meeting, there were attempts to keep the meeting from happening. The permits were canceled. The fire marshal limited the number of people who could enter the hall, and the ever resourceful Muslims found a way around that because the local black radio station broadcast the speech, and the Muslims went about purchasing and renting and borrowing all of the portable radios they could find. So even though they couldn't get into the hall, they were outside surrounding the building with portable radios that were playing or broadcast, that were in effect multimedia loudspeaker around the entire building so everybody could hear what was going on. They could hear the speech.
Do you know if there are congregations, where people congregated in other places with the radios outside, other than just sort of outside of the Magnolia?
I don't know, but I know that the idea was that when they got to the Magnolia Ballroom and couldn't get in and thought they were not going to be able to hear, then they began an effort so that everybody massed at the, they came from California, they came from New York, they came from Boston. I talked with a brother named Fred. I can't remember where he came from, but he explained how it was to travel in those days. Black folks couldn't stay at hotels and so forth. So you had to have your route planned out, and you had to have friends or relatives on the route where you could stop to bathe, to eat, to continue your trip. And I think it's Imam Bacha recalls coming from Chicago and getting off the bus and the open-armed reception that they received from the residents of Atlanta to allow them into their homes to change clothes, to bathe, to get ready for the meeting. So it was...
He shared that with in interviews for this group as well.
It was quite a reception, quite an experience, and I believe it was the only time that Elijah Muhammad spoke publicly in the state of Georgia.
Yeah, that's all that we can find on record. And then just a follow-up question: the leadership that came down from the nation who came and met with Klan members, so they came to Atlanta to have this sort of pre-meeting. Is that best you understand, or was there core phone conversations, or?
No, this was a face-to-face meeting with Klan members.
Yeah, that's a really interesting thing in and of itself.
And I think it was Minister Jeremiah who later attended a Klan. He actually attended a Klan meeting.
Okay.
I don't know if he was disguised as a Klansman. I can't remember, but I can't remember the details of it. But we used to tease him about it because he, see, what happens is the membership of the Nation of Islam under Elijah Muhammad is pictured as being thugs and lunatics and people from the radical fringe and so forth. But Minister Jeremiah was a U.S. Marine, a drill instructor. He was capable of taking care of himself under any circumstances. So his going secretly to a Klan meeting did not really put him at a disadvantage. He probably could have taken out the whole clavern or whatever they call themselves.
All right. Another question. From your experience, I know you had an opportunity to kind of travel a good bit across the movement. Were the temples and congregations in the South terribly different from the ones that were in the North? Were their locations more conspicuous, one place more so than the other? Were they purposely constructed, that kind of thing?
No, we did. The only building constructed by the Nation of Islam from the ground up that could technically be called a mosque was in Washington, D.C. That was Temple number 4, and it was built on 1519 4th Street, just off of New Jersey Avenue. And the construction was from the ground up. I believe there are some photographs of the initial meeting when I think it was Minister Farrakhan who introduced the Honorable Elijah Muhammad to the group. The Honorable Elijah Muhammad, I believe, did not speak or didn't make a speech, but made an extremely long prayer or dua
Okay.
when the building was first opened.
Okay.
And I believe they just celebrated their 50th anniversary of existence. What, last year or year before?
So in both the regions, north and south, both were, in terms of getting spaces for temples, they both used what had been previous Christian churches
They
or other.
Right. What basically happened was, like Elijah Muhammad did, a single individual would have heard the teachings. He would come into the city. He'd talk to people about what he had heard, and people would become anxious to hear more good things about the Negro, is the way the term went. And then there would a number of efforts started in barbershops, where you'd find somebody would come in, he would talk to the barber would accept to follow, then the barber would then speak to his customers while he was caring for them. In Chicago, they met from house to house. D.C., they met from house to house to start with. Milwaukee, I'm sure, would be a similar kind of arrangement. That's the way it started in Detroit. And then once the congregation or once the followers or the believers got to be a sufficient number, they couldn't fit in somebody's parlor or in a home, then they'd look for a place to rent. And normally it would be something like Oddfellows Hall or one of the Shriners Temples or one of those kind of places who would not be opposed. And then we see that there was a lot to do, a lot made of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad being anti-Christian, but that was not really the case, because when we look at the first Muslim convention, we find it being held in the Tabernacle Baptist Church in Chicago, Illinois. Now, if he was so anti-Christian, how on earth was he able to convince a Baptist preacher to allow him to have a meeting with several thousand people?
What year would this be?
That was, I believe, 1955 or 56.
Okay. And then earlier today we saw a photograph of that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there were photographs from of the building, from the meeting, the photographs on the covers of a couple of magazines published by other Muslim scholars.
Okay.
So.
And so, other than the one in Atlanta we talked about, and then you said there's one you believe in Florida, but other times when a property was purchased, it was either Elijah Muhammad made that purchase on behalf of it was on behalf of the Nation of Islam, and it was open. It wasn't like a group of attorneys or a real estate investment purchasing.
No, that was a last resort. If the property couldn't be purchased by a member of the Nation of Islam, then we resorted to other measures. I think it was always more of an opposition to blacks doing anything in the South. It was we termed it in the South, you could get, you could get as big as you wanted, and in the North you could get as close as you wanted. So.
All right. And then another sort of Atlanta-specific question. So we know there's I think now I've got it cleared out, there are two different events. So there's a big comeback fight for Muhammad Ali in Atlanta.
Right.
Because Georgia sanctioned or didn't have any prohibitions on his fighting. And then then there's another an event where he comes to Atlanta, and then Mayor Maynard Jackson is in the ring doing photographs and some other stuff. Can you tell us anything about either one or both of those events?
Well, when the Boxing Commission in Georgia was approached for a license, they granted Muhammad Ali a license to fight, and this was his first fight after all of the hoorah over his not wanting to fight in Vietnam. I can't remember the legislator's name, I tried to get an interview with him, but I believe he passed. He was very ill at the time and passed away. He was very instrumental in getting the boxing commission to allow Ali to fight in Georgia and in Atlanta. The event where Ali did a exhibition with Mayor Maynard Jackson was again hosted or engineered or put together for the most part by Harold Muhammad. It was, I believe, in the Lakewood area, the area that we still frequent sometimes for Eid.
Okay, like the
And
fairgrounds area.
the name of this event still escapes me. But I believe we had two of them in Atlanta. There was the first one in which it was very large, and the mayor came out and was happy to participate with Ali. I was not in journalism at the time. I was in a more administrative role with the community in Chicago, and didn't get an opportunity to attend. Otherwise, I would have been.
Do you know if the event was largely a community event, like
Yeah, it was.
a community or a Muslim-sponsored event, or a combination?
It was sponsored by the Atlanta community, and it was open to all the believers. That was, and it was very well attended.
Okay, super. Thank you. Then a couple of just a few more questions, and then sort of some personal questions about your experience, and then sort of your personal experience, and then sort of what you might know about other stuff politically. One of which is, I understand that you had a serious foot injury when you were a young man, and then evidently some stuff came about that. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Actually, it's a very unique situation, and it's one in which racism actually caused me to, well, it prevented the amputation of my left leg. I was in a pedestrian two-vehicle automobile accident. I got hit by two cars on a two-lane highway south of Washington, D.C., in a place called Gainesville, Virginia. It was near the family home of my grandparents. And I was on the way to the store for my grandmother. I had noticed some dark clouds, and my assignment was to go to the store that afternoon. And I thought it was going to be raining, so I talked my grandmother and let me go early, and off I go to the store. Now, in those days, this was 1952. In those days, there were a number of raucous and ugly Caucasians that lived in those areas, and they would see a black person, especially a child. I was 12 years old. They would see you on the road. They would pretend like they were going to run over you. They put one wheel in the dirt, and it would kick up a big dust storm, and you'd think you were going to be run over by this car, and you'd run to the side. They would go by, they would jeer, they would throw beer cans and things at you, just out of spite, just out of pure racism. No other answer can be had for it, no reason for it. So I heard the car horn, and I was walking facing the oncoming traffic, and a car behind me was in the passing lane. So what happened was there was a truck that slowed down at a railroad crossing, and two cars, not wanting to take the time to slow up behind the truck, decided to pass the truck. So one pulled out to pass, and then the car in front of him pulled out to pass without looking behind. So he bumped him off the road, and when the driver of the car in the back attempted to pull back in, he hung his bumper in the rear fender well of the front car. So in effect, he couldn't get the car out, he couldn't slow down. It was almost the 4th of July. They were racing to get home to be with their families for the 4th on the next day. And he's on the horn. There's a big cloud of dirt. I think it's just somebody with a wheel in the dirt trying to make me jump.
Yeah.
So I backed up to a little fence that was there, and before I knew anything else, I was seeing stars and I was flying in the air. Now, I injured my back. I had compound fracture of the left leg. I had a fracture of the femur, thigh bone. And because of the jeans that I had on, the swelling of the thigh caused the jeans to act as a tourniquet.
Okay.
And so I didn't bleed out at the scene. They brought an ambulance in and transported me 15 miles to the nearest hospital, which was in Warrenton, Virginia. What happened there was that we got to Warrenton, and I'm on the gurney in the hospital, and there's a disturbance in the operating room. There's a argument between a mother and the emergency room doctor. And she doesn't want the emergency room doctor to put a stitch in her daughter's eye who fell off of her tricycle, because she's afraid that the daughter will wind up with a scar above her eye. So I'm laying on a gurney in the hallway. I can't even get into the emergency room. And I'm listening to this argument going on between the mother and the emergency room physician. When we're finally admitted into the emergency room, what happens is the doctor says, he takes one look at my leg, and he says that his leg is so badly injured, the only thing we can do is amputate at the knee. So my grandmother wouldn't let him amputate. She says, well, his parents are in Washington, D.C. They'll have to make that decision. Can you give me an ambulance or put him in an ambulance to go to D.C.? She was told point blank by the physician, we don't have an ambulance to take a nigger 30 miles. So, as black folks have to be resourceful, she thought about the undertaker that buried my grandfather 6 months prior. So she told me quietly, she said, I'm going down to talk to the undertaker. And I said, Grandma, I ain't dead yet.
Soon to that.
But what she did was, she had the presence of mind to know that the undertaker had an ambulance, or it was actually the dead wagon. So she convinced the undertaker to drive the 30 miles with me in the dead wagon. So we get back to D.C., and as Allah would have it, the undertaker's son had rolled an automobile on his arm. He turned it and crushed his arm. So the undertaker sought out the best orthopedic surgeon on the East Coast, who happened to be a doctor named Gladden, Gladden. Dr. Gladden, who had practiced, and he'd learned medicine and practiced at Howard University or at Freedman's Hospital. Now, Freedman's Hospital is a hospital that was established after the Civil War because blacks wanting to learn medicine were not allowed to cut white cadavers. So if you were black and you wanted to learn medicine, you had to practice on black people. You had to have your own separate but equal, quote unquote, hospital.
Yes.
And this doctor, I looked him up later on, turned out to be the top orthopedic surgeon in the nation. And the undertaker explained that since I was a pedestrian, insurance was going to cover the cost, that would he come over and at least have a look at my leg. So Dr. Gladden came over. He explained the operation one way to me when he was explaining it. But as it turned out, he did the operation differently. I can see from the x-rays now. But he did a 5-hour operation. He reattached my severed foot. He didn't because the damage was so extensive to my leg, he said he didn't have to cut anymore. All he did was perform the operation and stitch my leg up. He actually put 6 machine screws into a metal bar along the side of my leg. And then for the next 8 months, I was in a cast from my armpits to my toes. And when he took that cast off, he said, okay, I can sleep at night now because I know I won't have to amputate. He said, but if your body had not reestablished the circulation in your foot and leg, then we would have had to amputate anyway. So by the grace of Allah, it was racism at that hospital denying me an ambulance that caused me to be in the company of the undertaker who by the grace of Allah introduced us to the best orthopedic surgeon in the United States.
It was a tremendous series of events. Wow, thank you for sharing that. Two other questions for you. One of which is just a real quick question we were talking about earlier today, and I just wanted to sort of follow up on that. In Atlanta in the late 70s, very beginning in the 80s, when there's the missing and murdered children, terrible situation that was going on in town, you were telling me about how the newspaper responded to that. And was it the Bilalian News?
It was Bilalian News, yes. And what we did, at that time, I was working as an assistant editor under, I believe, Gaif Nur Kashif. And I suggested that out of respect for the missing and murdered children, that we run the masthead or the banner on the front page in black until we had some closure for that matter.
And so you guys did that.
And we did that for months. Yeah, we did that for months.
And then last personal question, could you just tell us a little bit about your high school experience?
Okay. I was attending high school.
Okay, and then a final personal question, if you could tell us about your high school experience.
I was attending segregated high school. Well, I attended segregated schools in Washington, D.C. all the way through until high school. I continued into high school. I went to Charles Young Elementary School, Brown, and then later Banneker Junior High School. And then I went to Armstrong Technical High School. I was just getting finished with the accident we discussed earlier.
Yes.
When it was time to go to high school, 1954. So I started at Armstrong, and the Supreme Court decision in 1954, Brown versus Board of Education, determined that separate but equal was not really equal, and that schools should be desegregated. Washington, D.C., being a federal municipality, didn't have a governor or anybody else to object. So they had from May until September to put into effect a desegregation program. I was one of the first 20 or so students in Washington, D.C. to go from Armstrong Technical High School to McKinley Technical High School, and in effect desegregate the high school at McKinley. So
Was that your first year in high school?
that was my that was my second
year in
year
high school.
And to be honest, at Armstrong we had a great facility, and Armstrong is where I learned lithography, and that was what allowed me to go to work at Muhammad Speaks. However, there were only like 4 courses of study at Armstrong. You could be a janitor, you could be an automobile mechanic, you could go into printing or lithography because you could get a job at the Treasury Department working on the presses that do the money. And I forget what the other one was. Oh, custodial services. So that was the limit of technical training that you could get. When I went to McKinley, it was as different as night and day. I actually flew a link trainer aircraft for 200 hours before I left McKinley High School. I took aviation, I took meteorology, I took radio, I took electronics. I did all the sciences. We actually created a radio station on campus that could broadcast during lunchtime, our own on-campus radio station. We didn't have any real problems in terms of racial animosities to start with, because the majority of the students there were about education and were of a better class of people. About 2 or 3 months into the semester, they went for open enrollment, and some of the local African Americans from the neighborhood were able to attend. The number of African Americans attending increased significantly, and some of the Caucasian students took exception to that. And we had some friction between the students. And then the black kids were allowed to go home early. And the following day, that Friday, we came back to school, the white kids were boycotting. And then they decided to march to the White House, and they marched down to the White House. And what happened after that was the better class of families that had children at McKinley decided to take their children out and send them to suburban schools. And then we didn't have school for a couple of days. And then when we started school up again, we didn't have the same quality of Caucasian students as we had in the beginning. So we didn't have a lot of friction, but we had more friction. We had more, initially it was like one African American to a classroom. My English teacher was the most unique person, the most unique teacher that I had. She was amazed that she had an African American student in her class that could actually read Shakespeare. She would invite other teachers into the classroom and call me up front to read. So it was like, excuse me. So.
All right, thank you for that. And then final question for the evening is just based on your experience, personal experience and professional experience. What can you tell us about the collaboration of African American Muslims with government in Atlanta in particular, and then sort of at state levels, county levels, national level in general?
Well, we had an organization in Atlanta called MAPAC, Muslim American Political Action Committee, headed up by Iastria Sabir. And we had marvelous interaction between state, national, local. But as far as I can remember, the Muslim community always had interaction with elected officials. Even in Washington, D.C., when I came in the 60s, the captain, Brother Quentin RX, I would accompany him to the Capitol. We'd go in and out of the offices of the elected officials. The black elected officials were happy to see us. In Atlanta, we had really good info. We'd hold town hall meetings prior to elections. We'd get very good cooperation from the candidates who would come out to be questioned by not only members of the Muslim community, because the town hall meetings we had were not limited to the Muslim audience. We would have them open, we'd have open audience. So we'd have Muslims who had their concerns to express, but we'd have other community members. We were able to do a lot of work in terms of helping individuals with problems. We would have, I can't remember the name of the company, but there was a large company there that had a number of Muslims from Somalia that worked there who wanted the opportunity to pray during working hours, or they wanted a facility to pray, and they wanted the prayer times to be recognized. we were able to negotiate that without any problems. So we've had a number of elected officials such as Donzella James, who has been very instrumental in assisting the Muslim community with proclamations from, even one from the governor for Eid. I think that was the, can't remember which year, but that was the year we had the Eid at, what's that? That's the hall that's outside of 285. And we had so many Muslims coming to Eid that they gridlocked 285. And she was on her way with the proclamation from the governor and not able to get to the Eid until after the prayer. But she had the proclamation. We've had Imam Bacha speak to the Georgia legislature. We've had Imam Muhammad present to address the Georgia legislature to do the invocation. So we've had exceptionally good conversation with political leaders and elected officials.
Well, super. Thank you very much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.
And then again, on behalf of the whole collective, I want to thank you for your time, your energy, the vast resources that you have available in the Brandon collection that you continue to share with us. We deeply appreciate it.
It's all my pleasure, and I give praise and thanks to Allah.